Thanks, James. Yeah, some great updates this month. Really exciting. So this month, we're going to focus on just some security updates you might want to consider implementing or reviewing over the summer. These are all things which we look at as part of our security audits, and we could do all of this for you and a lot more. But these are just some of the essential things I'd recommend they think about reviewing on your domain. And yeah, let's get into it. So actually, before we get too far into it, always put this disclaimer in. Don't make any changes while on this call. You know, it might seem like a great idea to let's implement two-step verification for all of our staff, but you probably want to talk about it first internally before you roll out that change. So, you know, do always just maybe make a note of what you want to change, discuss it internally before rolling these things out. I don't want to get in trouble with anyone. Cool. So my security checklist. So starting with, of course, two-step verification. This is the single best thing you can do to protect your users from cyber threats. And it's super easy to configure. And I'd say it's actually easier now than it used to be, because there's loads more different methods you can use to use as your second factor for two-step verification, because you're combining that extra layer, that extra factor with your existing password. So super easy to configure. If we go into security, authentication, and two-step verification, I can then select the OU I want to enforce this for. So let's select my staff OU, for instance. At the moment, I'm allowing staff to turn it on optionally, but I'm not enforcing it. So I always recommend enforcing this to staff. Staff have access to lots of confidential and sensitive data, so really important to make sure their accounts are protected. So what I would normally recommend doing is selecting on from a particular date. So we could turn it on from maybe end of July, or we could time this for the start of a new academic year. So we could say, let's turn it on from the 1st of September. Up until that date, staff are going to be notified automatically when they log on to Google that they need to enroll in two-step verification. But if they don't by this date, then they're going to be locked out, unfortunately. But this will automatically prompt those staff to do this if they've not already done so. You can also add a grace period for new staff. So if I've got new starters and I want to give them a bit of time to get logged on and sort everything out, then we can have a grace period where they can add, they're not enforced to add their two-step verification method until that time is up. Martin, did you have a question just then?
No, I wanted to open the chat. I clicked the wrong button, sorry. I wanted to comment that the grace period, I've learned the hard way, counts from the date that you create the user account.
Yes.
So if you create user accounts well in advance, you might run out of the grace period, and your users, when you give them their credentials, might already be locked out.
Yeah, very good point. Thank you for adding that. It is based on the creation date of that user, not the date when they first log on. Yeah, thanks for highlighting it. We can also adjust the frequency, so you can allow users to trust a device. So if they're always using the same device, so if they have a one-to-one device, so that's a MacBook or a Chromebook, then they're not going to be prompted every time on there. So like balancing security and usability there. And for methods, by default, any is selected, which means you can use text messages, phone calls, the Google Authenticator app, yes, no prompt, passkeys, security keys, and so on. However, I would recommend, if you're implementing this now, I would exclude text messages and phone calls from day one. These aren't very secure methods. They're much more secure methods to use. So I would disallow those initially, well, permanently, and encourage staff to use either a yes, no prompt on their mobile device, use a security key or a pass key. You know, if you've got up-to-date devices with a built-in security TPM chip, whether that's a Windows device, MacBook or Chromebook, that device can be your passkey and your two-factor method for two-step verification. So that's a great option, which everyone's always got with them. So highly recommend that. If you're rolling it out for admins, you might want to restrict this to security keys only, which are the strongest method for two-step verification. And when we're done, all we need to do is press save. And another useful report just to highlight here is if we go into reporting and you want to track how many users have enrolled in two-step verification or haven't yet, you can go to user reports and security, And in here, we can filter by, where is it? Two-step verification enrollment. So let's leave it as enrolled initially. I can see then, oh, only one user on this domain has enrolled so far, but then I could also get a list of all the users who haven't enrolled yet, and then drop a message to those users. I could filter just by the staff users. I could then export that and send a targeted message out to those staff who haven't done it yet. So do have a look at 2SV. So staying on the authentication and security theme, do you think about your admin accounts as well? So of course, do make sure you're already using two-step verification with your super admin users. Make sure it's a strong method, such as using a security key or a pass key. For your admin accounts, other things you want to keep in mind, and which I find happening from time to time, is try not to use your staff account as your super admin account. It's much better, it's much more secure to have a dedicated super admin user, which is separate from your staff user. So then you're just using your staff user for internet browsing, third-party apps and email, but your admin user is only used for super admin activities. One of the other things you can do then for your super admin user is enroll it in the Advanced Protection Program, which is a program which Google run, which turns on various security features. So it turns on two-step verification with a security key or pass key. It turns on Chrome safe browsing by default. And it also restricts what third-party apps those accounts can use to only verified apps by Google. So I would encourage you to turn that feature on the Advanced Protection Program on for your dedicated admin users. So do look at splitting up those two roles and keeping them separate. The other thing you want to do is regularly review your super admin activity. And the easiest way of doing this is via the investigation tool, which is always one of my favorite Education Plus features you can get. And if we go into the investigation tool, you can come into here, and then if we, once it's loaded, we select the admin audit log events data source. And this shows us all admin changes occurring on our domain, who changed these. We've got full details here, and we can do things like filter this by particular event types. So I could filter it by an event and find, let's say, when was an admin role last created and who created that. Okay, not a good example in this domain. That particular action hadn't occurred, but I can also filter by a particular actor, or I can also group these results as well. So if I want to see which admins are making the right changes lately in the last 6 months, I can see that and who that is all listed here for me. So do explore that regularly. You can also, based on the researchers, create an activity rule. So if you wanted to get an automated alert about a new admin being created or certain options being changed within the admin console, you can create alerts for these as well. Cool, let's just cancel that and go on to our next recommendation. So onboarding, offboarding, really important to review, and probably one of the more complex things we have to look at as part of our security audits. So when it comes to onboarding, that's a little bit easier. You're creating accounts, you've got that kind of data flowing in. But often what I find in the security audits we do, it's often harder for schools managing that offboarding process, either because they're not getting notified when someone leaves in a timely manner, but also, what do you do when you need to close that account down because the user might still want some access, at least some limited access during that time. But these are things I would recommend doing when a user leaves your school, whether it's a member of staff or a student. So firstly, suspend that user account, or I should update the slide now, archive that user account. Suspending or archiving removes that access. The advantage of archiving that user account is it also frees up the education fundamentals license for you. So both get the same end result, but archiving frees up that license for you. Now, this is a contentious issue, but I would recommend disabling Google Takeout for your staff users. I know staff create a lot of their own resources and might bring resources into your domain, but the trouble with Google Takeout, it isn't always very precise in what you're taking out, particularly if you're using the transfer option, which literally transfers all of their Gmail and Drive data to a new Google account. Instead, what I'd recommend doing is to staff place their resources in a particular folder and then just download that folder using Google Drive instead. So it's much more intentional and purposeful, and not just downloading their entire drive, which could of course include student information and other sensitive data. It's also good practice to move our users into a leavers OU. So do I have one on this domain? I hopefully do. Let's have a look. So I've got a suspended users OU here. I'd recommend moving any archived or suspended users into that dedicated OU. And then once you're in there, then you can do things like turn off any external sharing, or you could turn off internal sharing as well with a trust rule, just to limit what's then being made available from those accounts. Because even though you've suspended that user or archived user, anything they've previously created or shared, whether internal or external, is still being shared. So you might still end up with other staff or students still using resources from that suspended user. So good to think about what's happening to their files as well. Other things you might want to consider doing are revoking any tokens, any cookies for that user, so that will force sign them out from any devices. You might want to take away that recovery information as well from their accounts. Change passwords as well, but if you've suspended or archived that user, probably not a problem. But of course, if you do ever have to reactivate that user, probably good to have that password changed at that point as well. But more guidance in this Learn More link as well. Okay, another area we always check, and one of the first things we check with the Gmail review for the security audit is, have you set up your DNS records to authenticate messages properly? So firstly, just looking at your records to make sure mail delivery is flowing okay and working okay on the domain. But then starting looking at authentication, we look at the SPF record to make sure that that is a valid record and configured properly. We look to see whether you've configured DKIM on your domain for message authentication as well. And then once both of those are configured, then we'd look at making sure that DMARC is also configured, which of course enforces that policy then, so that if a mail server is sending email on behalf of your domain but it's not been allowed to, then you can configure your DMARC policy to make sure those messages get sent into the user spam folder. Now, if you're on Education Plus, a really useful feature you have within the admin console sits under the security tab on your domain, and it's called the security health page. It takes a few moments to load. Quicker on this domain, it's just a bit of a smaller domain. But what it does, it looks at several, more than several, quite a few different recommended security features and options. Not as many as we do look at, but just some key settings here. It's also a really quick way of checking that you have DKIM configured. So we've done that on this domain. However, we don't have DMARC configured. And as you can see here, it's highlighting the domain it's not been configured for. We also get this box on the right-hand side where we can read more about what that means and learn how to configure that. Good news is we did configure SPF record on this domain. So we've done SPF and DKIM, but we do need to go and look at that DMARC record to get that configured. So if you have Education Plus, I do recommend running the security health page, looking at what you've got recommended in here. And it's not just an exercise about getting green ticks throughout, because some of these things you might find a bit too restrictive for education, but it's a good guide and a good starting point before moving on to a full security audit. Okay, also on the Gmail theme, Gmail safety features. So these all sit within the admin console under your Gmail configuration. So if we go into apps, Google Workspace and Gmail, this turns on some of the more advanced features we've got to ensure Gmail security. So if we go into safety, and in here, we've got options for protections against attachments, links and external images, and spoofing and authentication. So if we take spoofing and authentication, for example, all of these features, well, almost all of them, as you can see, are already turned on. So starting with this one, we've got a feature here which protects against domain-based spoofing. So what that means is an attacker registering a really similar domain name to your own, and then using that domain to try and trick users into opening their message and running whatever code or link they've got linked into there. So if we turn this on, Google will protect against that for us automatically. We can also choose what we want to happen to those messages. So we can either stick with a default and keep that in the user inbox, but show a nice clear warning to the user that this message is risky. We can move it to user spam, or we can quarantine that message. So we've got lots of different controls in here. I would generally just turning all of these features on so you get maximum protection. So let's do that now. Turn on these last two options and hit save, and just makes all of my users' Gmail inboxes a lot safer. So a nice quick win for you there. Third-party app access. So this has been quite a one we've talked about quite a lot in the last couple of years. You probably remember a couple of years ago, Google changed the behavior for third-party app access for under 18s, so that all apps you want your students to use must be trusted. I'd recommend thinking about doing the same or similar for your staff. So what I would recommend here is let's go into this domain now. It's got a bit more activity. So if we go into security, access and data control, and API controls, in here, what we've already done is, actually, let me back up a second and let's have a look at our settings first of all, just to recap what we've already got configured here. So under 18s, we're not allowing any access to any third-party app. It's got to be trusted. But the default for over 18s, for your staff users, is they can just access any app. And of course, staff might have sensitive data stored in their Drive or Gmail. So it's good practice to control what apps can access these services. So on this domain, as you can see, we have marked Drive and Gmail as being restricted, just like this. You can also restrict it just for high-risk scopes as well. So I've restricted both of these services already. And what that means then is, let's find an example in here in our accessed apps list. Here you go, Canva is a good example. So in this case, we've already trusted Canva, so Canva is going to continue working even if Drive and Gmail are restricted. But if we hadn't trusted Canva already, what it would mean is if we did restrict Drive, then users would into Canva, so we're still allowing that, but Canva wouldn't have any access to user drives unless it's trusted. So as part of doing this, it would be a good exercise to just go through your accessed apps, first of all, reviewing which apps users are using. You can filter this by what services they're requesting. So we could just look at what is using Google Drive and ones which aren't already configured, prioritize looking at those, and then you can go through, review that app. You might want to check its privacy policy. If you're in the EU, make sure it's GDPR compliant, and then go in here, and if you want your staff to use that app, then mark it as trusted. Then once you've done that, come back out into here, go into your Google services, and then start restricting access to Drive and Gmail. And then it gives you more assurance then that only apps you're trusting can access school sensitive data stored in those services. And if a case ever comes up where a member of staff does want access to a particular app, another feature you can turn on, which is brand new, under here, you can now enable staff to also request access to apps which are currently blocked, or even request apps on behalf of their students as well. So we'd recommend turning on those options. Data loss prevention. So this is actually in all editions of Google Workspace. It's a really useful feature. What it does is it can help you detect and then prevent the sharing of sensitive data within Google Drive, within Gmail and chat. If I just share my screen now, I've got an example set up here already, which is using not just data loss prevention, but also an Education Plus feature called classification labels. So if we start off first of all, and I'll just show you what label I've configured, and then we'll look at the DLP rule and what we're doing there. So classification labels sits under access and data control, and we can look in our label manager and see what labels we configured for our domain. And on this domain, I've just got one here I've created earlier called file sensitivity, and this label has got several different options, which creates then a nice badge within Google Doc, Sheet or Slide, which looks like this. And it's a nice clear indicator then of how that document should be shared. So it's level of confidentiality. So we've got options here ranging from confidential through to public. So across labels before, you can make it so that labels can be assigned by your users manually if you want to, or you can also assign labels automatically as well. But just focusing on DLP in this example, in this case, we're going to use a data loss prevention rule to assign the label for us, but also then restrict the sharing of that item if it's been marked as confidential. So we can do that with just two different rules. So our first rule here, let's look at this one. In this case, I'm using a rule to classify health information as being confidential. So I've created a new rule, I've given it a name, and I'm assigning it to the entire domain. I'm applying this rule just to Drive files and Gmail. And then we're looking at all content within that particular document, and we're doing a word match in this case. And I've already uploaded a word list of key health terms I want to match. And we're just matching any word from that list. And if we find a match, Gmail is going to have a classification label applied, and we're applying the confidential one there. And we're doing the same for Google Drive as well. So we're applying a classification label and then marking that as confidential as well. So that's applying the label. Once that label's applied, we've got another rule here. Where has it gone? So this one. So we've got another rule then, which is, again, applied to the whole domain. This one's just looking at Drive files. And in this case, we're looking for any documents with a classification label assigned. We're looking at our file sensitivity label and looking for anything tagged as confidential, restricted, or internal. And if it's tagged with any of those labels, then we are going to block external sharing. And how that looks in practice is if I jump into Google Sheets, and I should have some data I prepared earlier. So let's look at this one, for example. I've got some school trip data here. As you can see, it's already got a confidential label applied, and it's letting me know there's some security limitations for this file because external has been limited as I have got this confidential label applied. And this happens in real time. So even if I copy this data now, open up a new Google Sheet, share as tab instead, and paste my data into here, give it a few moments, and then it should tag this document as confidential for me automatically. This is always a nervous moment on a live call. Will it work this time? There we go, it's done it perfect. So it's tagged that as confidential for me. I have let users adjust this. You could block users from changing this, but in this case, I wanted users to have the option. If it has incorrectly tagged something, you can come in here and manually reclassify that document if need be. And just one example, there's lots more examples built in to your data protection rules here as well. So another great way of getting started is to use the built-in templates you've got available in the admin console. So these look at things like financial information sharing, health information, personal information, and there's lots more options within there as well. So yeah, do explore those. Really useful to set up. DLP, like I said, available in all editions. Classification labels only available in Education Plus. Cool. Last one now, almost the last one. So I also just wanted to quickly talk about protecting your data. So we've talked about leaking data, but just thinking about backing up your data as well. Would highly recommend thinking about having a third-party backup service to back up your critical Google data. One of the common misconceptions I come across is that schools might think Google Vault is a backup tool. It's actually not. It's an e-discovery tool. It can let you recover deleted items provided the user hasn't been deleted, because essentially when a user deletes an item, it's just being hidden from their view, but it's still on your Google Workspace domain and being retained by whatever retention rules you configured in Vault. However, if you delete a user, then that after 25 days, that user is cannot be recovered. it's permanently deleted. So that's when it's useful to have a backup tool. Also for other reasons as well, protecting against potential ransomware and other kind of security issues. So I would encourage you to think about that. Also explore what you've got configured in Vault and for your retention rules. So worthwhile looking at that. And just one to finish up on. So I just added this in there. I've just been working on a project for context-aware access for a college who wanted to prevent access to Google services from outdated devices. So if users were running an old version of Windows or Mac OS or Chrome, then they didn't want to allow access. This is to help them achieve cyber essentials in the UK. So if you do have Education Plus and you want to add even better security to your Google services, then do look at context-aware access. You can do it based on device version, the version of Chrome, whether the user's configured two-step verification, the country they're logging on from, or whether on campus or off campus. So do explore that. Lots of options there you can configure. A really powerful tool, and we probably should do a whole call dedicated to this again, maybe later this year when we come back in September.